Got my coffee and today's guest here with me, so we're ready to roll again. I'm Michael Hanf, Executive Partner at Taiwan Advisory. Welcome to our Circular Coffee Break podcast, where we will be casually talking about everything circular and beyond. We hope the podcast is interesting, insightful, and provides a lot of new perspectives to you. But as always, if you have feedback, ideas, or just want to share some other topics with us, please leave a comment on your favorite podcast platform or drop us a message at info@taiwan.com. Now, let's jump in. My guest today is a circular economy researcher, lecturer, and consultant. In 2020, he started off his career at the Wuppertal Institute for Climate, Environment and Energy as a research assistant. From there, he went on to co-found a startup focused on sustainability, software and consultancy. And since last year, he works as a lecturer for corporate governance, business ethics, corporate social responsibility, and scientific writing. Furthermore, he supports the German Institute for Standardisation, DIN, as a circular economy expert. So for all of you who are not familiar with the German Institute for Standardization, it's actually an organization that develops norms and standards for business, government, and society. Some of you might be familiar with the paper standards that we're using continuously, DIN A4, A5, and that's where the DIN actually comes from. Back to my guest. He holds a BA in Business Management from the International School of Management, a Master of Science in Entrepreneurship and Innovation from the University of Wuppertal, and is currently a PhD candidate also at the University of Wuppertal, more specifically at the Jakstedt Center of Entrepreneurship and Innovation. I'm really excited about today's discussion about circularity, norms, and standards, which I personally believe are more than required for us to talk a common language. Thank you for joining me on the show today, Julian Lauten-Weiss.
Thank you so much for having me. I'm very excited to talk about a topic that some might perceive as a bit dry sometimes. Standards is something that's a bit complicated, but I think it's very impactful and very interesting, actually. So I'm happy to get into it.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think, as mentioned already, I think the topic of circularity is so complex and very often very abstract for people. So it's very important to have a common language, to have some standards to refer to, that we actually understand what we're talking about and what we mean when we talk with each other about the topic. Now, I mean, we first met in June 2020 in the context of your master thesis. Back then, you basically looked at circular business models and you developed a framework that could help companies, specifically startups, in developing and structuring their business. From your point of view, where are we today on this very topic? And has there been progress since you finished your master thesis from your perspective?
Yeah, actually, before I answer the question, I actually met Taiwan. Maybe we didn't meet specifically, but I met Taiwan already in 2019 when I was in Helsinki, and I attended one of your events around digital circularity. And that was actually also one of my first touch points to the topic of circular economy. So actually, this is a bit of a full circle moment being on this podcast right now.
Cool.
Yeah. But about the question, I definitely see that we have moved a certain way. Of course, now I'm more so in the circular economy bubble, so I definitely feel like there's a lot going on, and maybe outside the bubble, it's still, there's still work to be done. But my perception was that when I got started around 2020 in the topic of circular economy, a lot of people were basically repeating the information put out by the Ellen MacArthur Foundation. They were talking about those 3 principles, which was very important. And I think that was laying a lot of the groundwork. But I think now we've moved on to a point where we have much more granular discussions, and we talk about standards, and we talk about policies, and we talk about business models, we talk about finance. And I think we've really, the topic of circular economy has reached all sectors, it's reached all aspects of our economy. And I think now it's really about broadening the scope even more, getting more people involved. But I think there has been progress, even if sometimes it feels slow.
Yeah, absolutely. And I feel specifically over the past 1 to 2 years, it has really been accelerating across different parts of society, from companies to the regulator to consumers, but also employees. Now, at the same time, circular economy, we talked about it. It's very complex. It touches each and every single part of the company, of the organization, goes beyond company boundaries. It can be very abstract as soon as you start going beyond recycling, and the well-known concept. And different people, even within the bubble you mentioned, are using very different vocabulary depending on their role, their industry, or even their maturity. So if you talk to a supply chain expert, as we did in one of our previous episodes, you might talk in very different terms and about very different topics than if you talk with an R&D person or maybe even a person in sales. Through your research and now in the context of your work for the German Institute for Standardization, where do you think we have the biggest area for improvement when it comes to establishing a common language, a common terminology, and the standards that have been very helpful in other areas of our lives? And how do we drive this to a point where it really becomes an integral part of how we think about the topic?
Mm-hmm. That is a very good question, and not such an easy one to answer, of course. But I will maybe give some experience that I've had from this standardization work. So I am a member of ISO Technical Committee 323, which is the official name of the committee that is working on the standards. And basically the national standardization bodies, such as the DIN, send the experts, if you will, to this technical committee. So I'm not an employee by the DIN. I'm just like an associated member, if you will. And the work that's taking place is on the International Standardization Organization, or it's kind of orchestrated by them. So a discussion that is taking place there, and I think that is very emblematic of the discussion around how we talk about a circular economy, is taking place between basically 2 points of view on what a circular economy should be. I would just roughly categorize it into two. One is one where people have a more puristic view of a circular economy. So they say anything that circulates is circular economy. So this could technically mean a economy 100% based on recycling would be a circular economy. And then there's the other point of view where people say we need a more holistic view of the circular economy. And they talk about enablers, they talk about education, innovation, they talk about sustainability much more than the people maybe that have a more puristic view of circularity. And I think that is really what has to be discussed, and that is what is being discussed throughout this standardization work. And where can we find a common ground where the purists basically feel like we are sticking to one standard, we are sticking to one topic, and we are not making this, just opening this huge can of worms that, of course, has kind of a never-ending thing, because then we get into sustainable development, we get into social issues, because of course diversity and inclusion is something that is kind of needed for an economy that can really be circular, because we need to take everyone along. So that is the concern of the one side. And on the other hand, of course, it's very fair to say that if we really want a circular economy, it's not enough to just circulate some materials, but we really need to figure out how can we do this in an environmentally friendly way. And so this kind of, this debate has to happen on several levels, but I think it is happening within this ISO work. And my hope, of course, is that we come out with a definition and with some principles that will at least give a little bit to both sides, so we have a starting point from where we can, really get going with implementing more circularity measures.
Really, really interesting, and I think what you're saying is spot on. I mean, in a lot of the projects we're working on, what we realize is if you look at circularity on its own, you might actually end up optimizing your circularity, but sub-optimizing your CO2 footprint. If you think about logistics, if you think about topics like chemical recycling and a lot of other things that are very energy, very CO2 intense, or you might actually be impacting biodiversity or freshwater negatively along the way. So it becomes very complex. How do you see that in the dialogue considered? All of these cross impacts basically that make it much more complex than talking about the topic of circularity on its own, and naturally in a process like the ESO you discussed, you need to somehow ring fence the scope. You need to focus on a specific topic and then over time maybe build on it. How do you see that progressing? How do you see that discussion going?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I think scope is a very important term here because, yeah, the definition of the scope is one of the biggest debates, I think, inside and outside the work of the standard. I think it makes sense to first focus on a more purist view of circular economy, even though I very much support extending this perspective to other things. I think what would work, especially from a standards perspective, is to have separate standards focusing on separate things, but always referencing other types of standards. So if we have a circularity standard and we have circularity metrics in this standard, that we then say, well, if you're implementing or if you're measuring these metrics and if you're implementing these practices that we outline here, then you need to also consider this standard on CO2 measurement or this standard on biodiversity impacts. And you need to basically make some kind of assessment of the circularity measures. And of course, it's getting quite complex again, but I think they're just the complexities that we created in a globalized economy. And I think there we can use the technologies we have, the digital technologies we have, the satellites that are flying all around the Earth, to also make it easier to measure these things. So I think it feels overwhelming at first, but I think the technologies that we need to make it happen are already there.
And absolutely, and I think it goes a little bit into the direction what the EU on the regulatory side is doing with their do no harm kind of clauses that they basically incorporate into circular economy regulation, where they say if you do circular economy, at the same time you have to make sure you're not sub-optimizing other parts of the environmental sustainability or the broader sustainability agenda. So I think your point is very, very understandable and very right. Now, you mentioned technology, and technology will play a significant role in helping us become more circular, drive towards a circular economy, and address many of the other problems we're currently looking at: biodiversity loss, freshwater scarcity, all of these things. Now, you focus your studies and your research a lot on entrepreneurship and innovation. What role do you think these will play in transitioning towards a circular economy? And do you have relevant examples that you've been seeing that outline this impact, maybe even also in the context of the standardization work? Because innovation, entrepreneurship, and standardization are very often seen as not necessarily on the same side of a coin.
Yeah, for sure. Maybe I'll answer it in reverse order, because the last question I think is a very good one. Well, they're all good questions, but the last one is something that obviously interests me, since these are all topics that I look at, research, talk to people about. I think the main thing when I think about regulation or standards and entrepreneurship is actually the fact that a lot of the circular economy startups that are popping up now are emerging because of standardization and because of different types of regulations. In fact, our own startup idea, the software that we started making and then ultimately didn't for other reasons, but I think the idea, it actually came from the EU taxonomy, because we realized that a lot of companies would have to measure their sustainability alongside several new metrics that they've never really considered before, water related, circular economy related, CO2, of course, but also biodiversity. And we recognized that this new regulation would be a big challenge for companies, and we wanted to develop a digital solution to overcoming this challenge. And we by far weren't the only ones. I think there were a lot of startups that were trying to come up with a way to automate sustainability reporting and all of these things. And of course, we always have to be careful not to leave everything up to an AI, but I think in general, this can actually be a huge driver for entrepreneurship and also innovation. And I think that's sometimes overlooked. I think we always look at regulation as restricting, but I think it can also give us the impetus to become more creative. And maybe on the general topic of entrepreneurship and innovation, for me, in the context of a circular economy, it is actually a great way to get people excited about circular economy. Because when we just talk about regulation and we talk about restrictions, or maybe we cannot use single-use items for everything. What does that mean for the convenience that we're used to? I think a lot of the conversation is happening around the restriction that comes from sustainability issues and circularity for that matter too. And I think when we talk about innovation, when we talk about new solutions, and we talk about new businesses that are not just addressing sustainability challenges, but maybe also implementing new work, and they are focusing more on work-life balance maybe, or things like that, I think then it can become really exciting, because it gives us a vision of the future that is not just based on restraint, but it is based on new ideas and potential for a better life, and not just one that is slightly worse than the ones our parents had.
Yeah, absolutely, and I think what you're saying there is spot on. I mean, regulation, standardization, norms are normally very good for providing a stable operating environment, or security in an operating environment that otherwise might be too unstable to act upon. I mean, look at the discussions that are currently ongoing on EU level around digital product passports for textile and the electronic industry, which is actually providing a framework for companies to start developing solutions for end-to-end supply chain transparency and all of that. Now, if you look at the technology, blockchain will play a role, and some of the players out there are using private blockchains, some are using public blockchains, and unless you introduce standards and norms on how to work with the data, how to secure the data, how to make the data available, you will basically have many different solutions that cannot communicate with each other, which is not necessarily what we want at the end of the day. So I think your point of regulation and standardization being a driver for innovation is naturally a very important and driver and accelerator of this change. How do you see in general the current entrepreneurial and innovation activities in this field? Is there enough? How can we make sure that the innovation and the entrepreneurship is basically keeping up with the amount of change and challenges that we need to be addressing? Do you have any ideas, best practices from your research, but also from your work in that context?
Absolutely, actually, yes. And of course, there's never enough innovation, and there's never enough startups. I would say we need much more. But of course, there are some great examples, and I can speak actually from the region where I am currently doing my PhD, the Wuppertal region. There is a very interesting example for a circular economy accelerator program called Circular Valley. And they actually have a vision of covering more than just a single city, because Wuppertal is not that huge, but the region itself is quite densely packed with a lot of people, has a similar population to the entirety of the Netherlands. So it's, North Rhine-Westphalia is quite large. There's a lot of industry there, and I think that's in their business case, and I do not work for them, but I find it very compelling what they say, which is that there were several industrial revolutions already happening there, and I think it's only logical that the fifth industrial revolution basically is also taking place there, and they try to support that. And there are actually some very interesting startups that I could mention also from their program that I got to interview for my own research. For example, there is one that it's called Ponera, and they invented some crates, basically, or some pallets for logistics. So we have the Euro pallet, which makes up, I'm not sure about the numbers, don't quote me on that, but I think it was about 60%, so a bit more than half of the pallets used are those Euro pallets, and they are a great case for reusability. But what they do is that they have basically modular and adjustable pallets that you can use for odd-sized items that would normally need a single-use custom pallet. And they combine this with tracking materials, so the ultimate use of the pallet becomes even better than what we have with single-use pallets. And what I really found interesting talking to them was that they started their business case with efficiency in mind. So they just felt like it was a lot of waste that was being created. And the whole idea of circularity actually just came in after they were building their business model and they were expanding and talking to people. So actually for them, and I thought that was just a great example, that because circularity became a business case, circularity became the best option for their business model and their idea. And I think these are the stories that we need to be telling more, because it shows the potential of a circular business model.
Yeah, absolutely. I fully agree. And I also, I've been following the Circular Valley now for a while. And I think it's a great idea, because what you very often see is that a country is too big to look at circularity because of transportation logistics required, but a city might be too small because you don't have all the capabilities. So looking at a region, and specifically a region like the Ruhrgebiet, which is highly populated, very industrialized, is naturally great to have the different capabilities, have the different stakeholders involved, and then to create these public-private partnerships is very often a very critical part in that. Now, looking ahead a little bit, we talked about a lot of different things that are happening from an entrepreneurial point of view, from a standardization point of view. Where are the topics? But there's still a lot of gaps with regards to circularity today. I mean, the Circular Gap report tells us that we're actually going backwards in the circularity of our business world. The IPCC report basically paints a very gloomy picture of where we are at the moment and where we should be going very rapidly in the future. From your point of view and in your experience, where do you see the biggest opportunities? So if I'm either an entrepreneur out there or I'm a company, what are the things that you see would provide me, exactly as you said, this possibility of seeing circularity not necessarily as a cost factor, but as something that can positively contribute to my top and bottom line as a company, or that could be a great idea for the next startup that I'm founding?
Well, I think first of all, it is definitely about competitiveness. I think the transition to a circular economy is very similar to what we saw in the digital transformation. And there we really have the roadmap laid out from the past 20, 30 years, and where we saw that the first movers were often the ones that were the most successful. Maybe the fast followers were the ones that got a little bit of had a bit more safety. They were able to reduce some risks. But I think we are, in terms of circularity, we are at a time where the first followers are already, for the first movers have already moved, and the first followers are coming along. And so I think this is about remaining competitive in the long term, because especially when we have increasing regulation on unsustainable business models, this is going to become more and more of a pressing issue. And I think also when we speak in geopolitical terms, when we talk about resource independence and resilience, I think this is a very, very good solution, especially for Europe, that is a continent with very few natural resources. Of course, this is also relevant for other parts in the world, but I think it is one of the reasons why Europe is really pushing the topic of circularity, because we actually need to. Otherwise, we have very high dependencies on other countries delivering resources to us. So I think it is also a geopolitical aspect that is relevant here. I think also in terms of more on the company level, I think companies become more attractive to potential employees. I think the race for talent, the war for talent, however you want to call it, is on. There is, an aging population means less people in the workforce. And people are looking for a job with purpose. And I think circular economy is a great way to infuse purpose into a business model. So I think there's a long list. And of course, also in the long term, we can talk about cost savings with these initial investments, just like with digitalization, where you might have an upfront cost, but in the long term, 5-10 years, I'm sure that the circular solutions can also be more profitable in the end.
Absolutely. Very good. I mean, the coffee is empty, unfortunately, and it's time to wrap up this episode of the Circular Coffee Break. Thanks a lot, Julian, for joining me today and for the fantastic insights. Could still continue the discussion for some time, and I'm really looking forward to what's coming out of the standardization and norming activities that you're involved in. I think at the end of the day, as you said, it will drive innovation, it will drive entrepreneurship. So thanks a lot for joining me.
Thank you for having me.
I hope all of you out there listening to us today, you enjoyed the session and you got some new inspiration and ideas, and you will be following the standardization discussion or jump into the standardization discussion, because I think it's relevant and interesting for all of us who are interested in the topic. If you have any comments, ideas and suggestions, as mentioned at the top of the show, let us know either in your favorite podcast app or via email at info@taival.com. Also, please remember to subscribe to stay in the loop. We're basically dropping new episodes every 2 weeks, and we have a lot of really interesting guests coming up, either on the topic of circularity across very many different industries and other things. Thanks a lot for listening today. I'm looking forward to seeing all of you here on the Circular Coffee Break.